You know, um, when we think about a crisis, we usually picture like an explosion.
Right, a single massive event.
Exactly. A dramatic, undeniable moment, like a massive financial crash, an earthquake leveling a city, or, a sudden declaration of war.
The threat is immediate, it's highly visible, and everyone knows exactly what the enemy is.
Yeah, the alarm bells ring, the entire country pivots, and everyone just drops what they're doing to fight the fire.
But what if the crisis isn't an explosion?
Right. What if instead what if it's termites?
Invisible, silent, just slowly eating away at the wooden foundation while the paint on the outside of the house looks perfectly fine.
You're just living your life, going to work, watching TV, and meanwhile, the floorboards are hollowing out.
Until one day you lean against a load-bearing wall and...
Whole house shifts. Well, welcome to this custom deep dive
Yeah.
designed specifically for you. Today, our mission is to unpack a really fascinating and honestly pretty sobering piece of source material from Coffee Talk.
It's titled, Is America Reaching a Breaking Point? Debt, Division, and the Cost of Standing Still.
And because this text touches on the third rail of American conversation, government spending, taxes, and political polarization, we have a strict rule for how we are going to navigate this today.
Yeah, we are operating as a completely neutral lens today. Because the source material deals directly with deeply ingrained political divisions, it is crucial that you, the listener, know we are not taking any sides.
Absolutely none.
We are not endorsing left-wing policies, and we are not endorsing right-wing policies. Our goal is purely impartial. We are here to report on the contents of the source material and convey these ideas exactly as they are presented.
Right, we're ensuring a balanced exploration of all the perspectives mentioned. We're looking exclusively at the structural mechanics of this situation, the underlying math, and the incentive structures. We are not playing politics.
Not at all.
And the mechanics are what make this text so compelling. The source highlights this incredible historical contrast. I mean, America has a long-proven resume of surviving massive, acute crises.
Oh, sure. The Civil War, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Cold War.
Right. In those moments, the system worked because the threat forced a unified response. But the challenge outlined in this text isn't a single enemy or a single recession.
No, it is a slow-moving, interconnected combination of decades-old structural problems.
It is the termites.
Yeah, and the author outlines a roadmap of 3 specific, intersecting pillars that are creating this slow-moving crisis.
Okay, what are we looking at?
We are looking at a steadily growing national debt, an aging physical and digital infrastructure, and a level of political division that is basically paralyzing the legislative decision-making process.
Wow.
The danger here is systemic friction. None of these developed overnight, which means, well, none of them can be solved by passing a single emergency bill.
Before we look at what the country needs to build to keep moving forward, we first have to look at what it owes. Okay, let's unpack this. The text points out that government borrowing on its own isn't inherently a bad thing, right?
Right. The U.S. has always borrowed money to respond to wars, to handle public health emergencies, or to make major capital investments that actually strengthen the GDP over time.
Like we did it after World War II to build the interstate highway system, and it paid massive dividends.
Exactly. The problem is the current systemic pattern of borrowing more than the government collects in revenue year after year, regardless of whether the economy is in a recession or a boom.
Yeah, the source notes that borrowing during a boom is historically anomalous. Usually you borrow to stimulate a lagging economy and pay it down when revenues rise.
But today, the deficit spending is structural.
The text uses a family budget analogy to explain this, comparing the national debt to a family putting too much on credit cards and having less cash for groceries. But honestly, I want to push back on that a bit.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
Well, a government isn't a household. A family can't issue its own currency or set monetary policy. I actually think a better analogy for the national debt is like a smartphone running way too many heavy background apps.
Oh, I like that. That analogy works.
Right. Your battery's constantly training just to keep those apps running.
But let's push the technical side of it further. A government can theoretically print more battery power, meaning they can print more money to keep the phone running.
But doing so causes the phone's internal temperature to skyrocket.
Exactly. That heat is inflation. So if you print battery power to ignore the background apps, you devalue the currency, which hurts every single person holding that currency.
And then the central bank has to raise interest rates to cool the phone down.
Which brings us to the actual mechanical problem the source highlights.
Right. Your battery, the federal budget, is constantly draining just to keep those background apps running.
Mm.
And in this case, those background apps are the interest payments on the national debt.
Yeah.
You aren't even looking at those apps. They aren't building new bridges or funding new research,
Mm.
but they're eating up all your processing power. So when you actually want to open a new app to
Yeah.
respond to an unexpected emergency, you just don't have enough juice left.
What's fascinating here is how the source breaks down the budget mechanics. This is about mandatory versus discretionary spending.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, interest payments on the national debt are legally obligated. They are mandatory. As the total debt grows, and especially as interest rates rise to combat inflation, the cost of servicing that debt
Oh,
skyrockets.
wow.
We are reaching a point where the U.S. spends more on interest payments than it does on national defense.
Right.
Every single dollar spent servicing debt is a dollar actively crowded out of the discretionary budget.
It aggressively shrinks the slice of the pie that Congress actually gets to debate over.
Precisely. It shrinks funding for public education, scientific research, transportation, veteran services. The larger the interest payment app gets, the smaller the screen time for the vital functions that actually drive future economic growth.
So the mathematical reality is that you are paying for the past instead of investing in the future.
Exactly.
And just to make this smartphone analogy even more stressful, the source introduces a massive demographic squeeze that fundamentally alters the math.
Yes, the aging population.
Right, Americans are living longer, and the massive baby boomer generation is moving deeper into retirement.
Which is great for longevity, but
But the ratio of active workers paying into the system versus retirees pulling from the system has shifted dramatically. This means critical mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare require exponentially greater financial resources just to maintain their baseline functions.
which forces incredibly difficult structural trade-offs. Lawmakers are staring at a shrinking discretionary budget, and the math dictates they only have a few levers to pull.
And none of them are popular.
Exactly. They can raise taxes, which threatens to slow economic growth. They can cut spending on popular programs, which is, well, political suicide.
Yeah.
They can borrow more money, which accelerates the interest payment problem we just discussed. Or they can try to stimulate unprecedented economic growth to outrun the debt, which is incredibly difficult when you don't have capital to invest in innovation.
So every single lever causes pain to a different segment of the population.
It is an agonizing balancing act, and it perfectly illustrates the cause and effect loop moving into the second pillar of this deep dive.
Right. If mandatory debt interests and an aging population are legally eating up the vast majority of the budget, what gets starved? The discretionary side.
Yeah.
And the most critical piece of that discretionary side is the physical foundation of the country itself, the infrastructure.
Infrastructure is the ultimate deferred maintenance problem. The source emphasizes that we are dealing with systems built in the mid-20th century that were designed with a 50-year lifespan.
And we are now well past year 70.
Yeah. We are talking about concrete and steel, highways, dams, and municipal water systems where the pipes are literally rusting away.
But the text also makes it clear that modern infrastructure is much more complex than just paving roads,
Oh, for sure.
We are talking about the entire interconnected nervous system of the country. Broadband internet access, which is now a requirement for participating in the modern economy. Digital networks protecting financial data. The electric grids that keep our homes warm and our servers running.
Just look at the vulnerabilities exposed when extreme weather hits and regional power grids fail.
Because they lack the capacity to handle modern demand.
Right. It's the ports and airports managing a highly sensitive, just-in-time global supply chain.
As technology advances and populations migrate to new urban centers, the demands on all of these systems are increasing exponentially.
And the friction here is that updating this grid doesn't just mean patching a pothole. It means entirely replacing legacy systems with smart technology. That requires a massive injection of capital up front.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text presents this glaring paradox.
Okay.
On one hand, the source explicitly states that investing in infrastructure has one of the highest returns on investment of any government action. It improves public safety, it lowers transportation costs for businesses, it supports overall economic productivity, and it builds resilience against natural disasters, which saves billions in emergency FEMA funding later.
The macroeconomic benefits of infrastructure are universally recognized. Better roads mean cheaper shipping. Reliable power grids means zero manufacturing downtime.
But on the other hand, we just spent the first 10 minutes of this deep dive outlining how we are drowning in debt and legally obligated mandatory spending.
Right.
So I have to ask, aren't we trapped between a rock and a hard place? If modernizing the electric grid and the supply chain requires massive long-term funding and the federal battery is already drained, how do we physically pay for it?
The mechanism of how infrastructure is actually funded is exactly why this is a systemic gridlock.
How so?
Most public infrastructure isn't funded entirely by the federal government just writing a single check. It relies on federal matching grants pairing up with municipal bonds issued by state and local governments.
Well,
But when federal funding becomes erratic or gets slashed because of the debt squeeze, local governments are left holding the bag.
right.
They cannot issue enough municipal bonds to cover a multi-billion-dollar transit system without destroying their own local credit ratings or passing crippling property taxes onto their residents. It requires a sustained, reliable partnership across all three levels of government over a period of 10 to 20 years.
And securing a 20-year financial partnership requires leaders who possess fundamentally different political philosophies to sit in a room and hammer out a compromise.
Exactly. The text points out that the debate over funding infrastructure exposes entirely different views on governance.
Like what?
Well, one camp argues the only way to fund this is by cutting other government spending and deregulating private industries to build the infrastructure themselves. Another camp emphasizes that we must increase federal revenue through higher corporate or wealth taxes to fund these public works. Another favors highly targeted public-private partnerships, while yet another advocates for strictly limiting the size and role of the federal government, pushing the entire burden down to the states.
Which means to solve the infrastructure paradox, while simultaneously managing the crippling debt, our leaders actually have to negotiate. They have to pass complex, multi-layered legislation.
And that brings us to the third and perhaps most complex pillar outlined in the source: political division.
The engine of gridlock.
Yes, if the debt is the weight and the infrastructure is the failing foundation, the political division is the paralysis preventing anyone from picking up a hammer.
Now, to be fair to the history of the country, the text notes that political disagreement is not a new invention.
Oh, definitely not.
The founders debated the Constitution so fiercely that it almost fell apart multiple times. Political parties have been throwing rhetorical punches at each other for over 2 centuries.
Right. Disagreement, debate, and friction are quite literally the features of a healthy democracy, not a bug. It prevents the tyranny of the majority.
Exactly. Disagreement is the baseline. The structural danger today, as highlighted by the source, is that while disagreement has always existed, the mechanism of compromise has systematically broken down.
Yeah, and the text asks us to look at the why and how behind this. Why did legislators in the 1980s routinely negotiate massive bipartisan tax and infrastructure overhauls, while today, basic funding resolutions push the government to the brink of a shutdown every few months?
The source points the finger squarely at the mechanics of our media diets and the algorithmically curated communities we live in. We aren't just disagreeing on policy anymore, we are consuming information from entirely separate ecosystems.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how polarization is incentivized. Algorithms on social platforms and highly segmented cable news networks optimize for engagement.
And the data shows that outrage and fear drive far more engagement than nuanced policy discussions.
Exactly. As a result, voters are constantly fed narratives that frame the opposing political party not just as wrong, but as an existential threat to the nation. When voters look through these completely different, curated political lenses, they develop fundamentally different understandings of the exact same reality.
Yeah, and if two groups cannot even agree on the basic empirical facts of an issue, whether we are talking about inflation metrics, immigration numbers, or energy production, negotiating a compromise becomes mathematically impossible.
You just can't split the difference if you can't agree on the baseline number.
Right. So major legislation ends up taking years to negotiate, getting watered down into temporary half measures, or simply stalling out in committee.
Congress is a direct reflection of those dilated ecosystems. But the source introduces another structural layer to this gridlock that explains why politicians actively avoid long-term solutions. We have to look at the structural timeline of American politics.
You mean elections?
Specifically, the structure of elections, yes.
The 2-4-6 cycle. Members of the House of Representatives campaign every 2 years. Presidents campaign every 4 years. Senators campaign every 6 years. This means there is literally never a year in the United States where a major federal election is not looming over every single legislative decision.
Think about the massive pressure that incentive structure creates. Frequent election cycles demand immediate, highly visible political victories.
Right.
An elected official faces constant pressure to prove to their base that they are fighting the enemy. Furthermore, because of heavily gerrymandered districts, many politicians aren't afraid of losing a general election to the opposing party. They are terrified of being challenged in a primary election by a more extreme member of their own party if they dare to compromise.
Wow. So the system actively punishes collaboration.
It really does.
It's like trying to plant a mighty oak tree that will provide shade for your town for decades. But the landscapers know they might get fired every 2 years by a very angry homeowners association.
That's a great way to put it.
So instead of planting the oak tree, which takes incredible patience, requires a lot of water, and frankly just looks like a pile of dirt for the first year, they just plant fast-growing weeds to show the boss they did something.
Yeah, it perfectly captures the tension the text describes, the inherent conflict between governing for the next election versus governing for the next generation.
Grounding that in reality, look at the Highway Trust Fund. The federal gas tax, which is supposed to fund road maintenance, hasn't been raised since 1993.
Unbelievable.
Because inflation has eaten away its purchasing power, the fund is structurally insolvent. But raising a gas tax is wildly unpopular and provides immediate ammunition for a primary challenger.
Right.
So instead of making the hard choice to fix the structural math, planting the oak tree, Congress just relies on short-term emergency transfers of borrowed money to patch the hole for another 18 months. The incentive structure prevents long-term problem solving.
Let's bring these three pillars together because the source beautifully maps out how they feed into a vicious, self-reinforcing loop.
Yeah, let's look at the big picture.
You have the national debt, which is legally squeezing the budget and requires incredibly tough, wildly unpopular financial choices. You have the physical infrastructure, which desperately needs heavy, coordinated, long-term capital investment.
And you have the political division, fueled by algorithmic media silos and short election cycles, which makes reaching any agreement on those first 2 points nearly impossible.
It is a deadlock. Each issue actively exacerbates the others. If you can't agree on infrastructure funding, the supply chain bottlenecks, which drives up inflation.
And if inflation rises, the central bank raises interest rates.
Exactly. Higher interest rates make the national debt exponentially more expensive to service, which further shrinks the discretionary budget, meaning you have even less money for infrastructure.
It's a closed loop.
It is, which is exactly why the text notes these challenges have persisted across multiple presidential administrations completely, regardless of which political party held the congressional majority.
So what does this all mean? Are we just doomed to sit on the couch and watch the termites eat the house till the roof caves in?
Well,
The source actually makes a very deliberate, optimistic pivot here in the final chapters, and I think it's vital we focus on it. The text reminds us that history is a long game, and structural decline is absolutely not predetermined.
the doom narrative is easy to sell, but it ignores historical context. America has faced moments of profound, seemingly unsolvable uncertainty before.
Right.
The economic devastation of the 1930s, the deep, violent political and social conflicts of the 1960s, the stagflation of the 1970s. Every single generation has confronted a unique set of systemic challenges that felt entirely overwhelming in the moment.
And the text aggressively lists the underlying assets and ongoing strengths that the nation still possesses. I mean, we aren't starting from scratch here.
No, not at all.
We have the most massive, dynamic, and diverse economy on the planet. We are home to the world's premier research universities. We have a deeply ingrained, almost cultural reflex for entrepreneurship and scientific innovation.
We have abundant natural resources and energy independence.
And importantly, we have a long, resilient tradition of civic engagement. The tools to fix the foundation of the house are sitting right there in the toolbox. We have the capital, the brains, and the technology.
This raises an important question, and it is really the ultimate takeaway from the source material.
What's that?
The question the text poses is not whether America has structural challenges. It clearly, undeniably does. The math on the debt and the rust on the bridges prove that.
Yeah.
The true test, what the author calls the defining test of this generation, is whether citizens, businesses, local communities, and elected leaders can overcome the friction of their own incentive structures. Can they find enough common purpose to apply those incredible assets toward a long-term solution?
Can we look past the 24-hour news cycle and the 2-year election cycle and actually plant the oak tree?
Exactly.
And this is exactly why this deep dive matters directly to you listening right now. You are not just a passive observer sitting in the audience of this cycle. You are an active participant in the mechanics of it.
You really are.
You are the one driving over these bridges and relying on the power grid every morning. You are the one paying the taxes that service this mounting national debt. And critically, your attention fuels the media algorithms, and your vote dictates the pressure of those election cycles. You are a functional piece of the operating system.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, building on the source's call for common purpose. The text focuses heavily on national polarization.
Right.
But if Washington is structurally paralyzed by those two-year election cycles, the fear of primary challengers, and polarized national media ecosystems, perhaps the common purpose required to fix this isn't going to come from the top down.
Oh, that's interesting.
Since updating the country's infrastructure ultimately requires local, state, and federal coordination, maybe the most effective place to break this three-part gridlock is at the smallest, most local level.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Municipal bonds are voted on by local residents. Zoning laws for new infrastructure are decided at city council meetings. When a water main breaks on your street, neighbors have to figure out how to navigate the repair together, regardless of the political lenses they wear.
Because potholes and rusted pipes do not belong to a political party.
Exactly.
That's a phenomenal, empowering thought to leave on. Breaking the systemic gridlock by fixing the floorboards one local plank at a time, forcing the collaboration upward before the termites take the whole wall. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Navigating the mechanics of debt, infrastructure, and polarization can feel heavy, but don't let the sheer volume of information out there paralyze you. Keep asking questions about how these systems actually work, keep challenging your own assumptions, and stay fiercely curious. We'll catch you on the next one.